but you're seeing real-time manipulation of a hurricane on that screen. That's exactly what you're looking at.
But when you look at these frequencies, it's almost like they're all triggered at the same time. They're all coming alive at the same time. And are those happening from like some sort of machine or some sort of technology that's turning on and emitting these frequencies to literally push this hurricane in this direction?
Absolutely. That's a completely coordinated network. It's an AI-controlled, coordinated network.
Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a special video for you tonight. It's an interview that frankly I didn't put on my bingo card that I was expected to do this year. But here we are with recent events such as Hurricane Helene absolutely devastating the southeast of the United States. And now at the time of this recording, we are probably hours away from Hurricane Milton coming through Florida. And the meteorologists are saying that this is going to be one of the most devastating hurricanes that's going to swipe through the state of Florida. But there's an interesting conversation happening on the internet right now. And the question that people are asking is, are the things that we're seeing happen right now over the course of these past couple of days, are these merely natural phenomenon, just coincidence that these are happening at the rate that they're happening, in the locations that they're happening, with the devastation that they're happening, with this close to an election as well? People are asking the question, is this a natural phenomenon, or is this possibly manufactured by man? Well, today I'm interviewing somebody that I just got in touch with recently because of these skeptical questions that people are asking. Is it possible for man or even the government to manipulate the weather? Is that something that we're looking at in real time right now? And to have an expert voice on this topic was something that I really cared about. So today I have Dane Wigington. He's the lead researcher for geoengineeringwatch.org. And he has an amazing documentary that I just watched last night with my wife called The Dimming, which I recommend that you guys check out. I'll put a link for that in the description. But Dane, today I want to interview you. I want to get a little bit of a understanding from your perspective of what's happening here. So without further ado, Dane, if you could explain to our audience a little bit about your credentials, your career, and why you are a trusted voice, that you would say, in this topic, and also why we should be paying attention to what's happening right now and be critical thinkers about it.
On the issue itself, this is the most destructive interference in creation, life support systems by the human race ever launched. And again, superseding everything else at this moment. We could exceed that with nuclear cataclysm, of course. But right now, this is the greatest single detrimental factor with creation, nature, web of life. I did not want this battle. I'm not an activist. I'm not politically oriented. I grew up in smoggy Southern California and was striving to get out of that environment, moved to Northern California, middle of the wilderness, which is where I live now, off-grid home, wind, hydro, solar power. It was the cover article of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. I'm a former employee of Bechtel Power. That's the largest engineering firm in the world, very corrupt company, like Halliburton. I left at a young age because of that, never was under anybody's thumb since. But I was restoring habitat here on the east side of Lake Shasta in Northern California. I manage a big habitat reserve here. And when I began to lose massive amounts of my solar power uptake with a huge solar system from whatever these aircraft were emitting, I knew that could not be just, quote, condensation. I began to research the issue cap and found mountains of data on geoengineering, climate engineering, solar radiation management. I was surprised I had not heard of these programs before, and that's no accident. The governments don't really want the public to understand this, but I searched for the primary elements named in these patents, the seeding the clouds with light scattering particles to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy, which is the stated purpose of these operations. I began to test my precipitation to see if these elements were in the rain. I didn't want to find it. I knew it would change the entire course of my life if I did. I found aluminum in the first rain test I took, 7 ppb, 7 parts per billion, which I talked to hydrogeologists. This was high given my filtered forested location, no industry anywhere near, West Coast. Continued testing over the next 18 months. I had tests go as high as 3,450 ppb of aluminum in my rain. That's toxic rain. And the aluminum is toxic, for those that don't know, to all life forms, period. No exceptions. And though we have some that try to cover this issue up, claim aluminum's a common element in our strata, which is true, we should expect it everywhere. not in free form. That's the key. Aluminum does not exist in nature in free form. If it's in free form and it's in your rain, it's been mined, refined, and dispersed, period. So that's what started me on this journey, Cap.
So help me understand, first of all, what does it mean? What does free form mean?
It means it's not bonded to any other element. It's bioavailable. And we're talking about aluminum nanoparticle. And for your listeners that don't know how small a nanoparticle is, you can fit 1,000 nanometers across the width of a single human hair. It's inconceivably small. 100,000. It's 100,000 nanometers across the width of a single human hair. You can't conceive of how small these particles are. So we have recent science study that indicates, this is peer-reviewed science study, that we may be inhaling, depending on location and conditions, as much as 20 million nanoparticles in a single breath. And that's very hard to comprehend. But when you see every other commercial on Matrix Media TV is some sort of respiratory something, and yes, we have pollution. We recognize that. We have a lot of issues with particles in our air. But we've extrapolated from rain testing, working with the University of Minnesota, and geoengineeringwatch.org is the most credible source of data on this issue. We strive to be that source. We're the only ones that have done the kind of testing we've done and the dimming. We took a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab to altitude, top scientists, sampled what heavy aircraft were emitting, processed that at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, world-renowned institution. We don't say it if we can't back it up. So working with the University of Minnesota, with hundreds of rain tests, we extrapolated what the likely global annual dispersion was: 40 to 60 million tons of these particles dispersed annually as part of these operations.
My goodness. So you shared a lot. I want people to kind of catch the gist of what you said there. You're not just a guy who is pulling together information that you're finding on the internet and putting clips together. You worked with the top engineering firm in the world for a period of time. And now with the work that you're doing, I'm guessing, let me kind of craft your story or understand your story a little better. Did you make this discovery about this dimming effect that's happening with with solar energy? Did that take place before you finished working with them or after you finished working with Bechtel?
Way after. I left Bechtel Power at a very young age because what I saw, I did not want to become. It's a very corrupt company. You don't become that size of company working with criminal cabals masquerading as governments without being very corrupt yourself, just like Halliburton. And I'm sure people are familiar with the corruption there. So sure. I've been on my own ever since. But the testing we've done, and also working with former government scientists, U.S. Forest Service, Fish and Game, and their studies as well, soils testing, that's what Geoengineering Watch has done. And for those that know who National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is, the nation's weathermen, and NWS, National Weather Service, both of those agencies have an illegal federal gag order on them right now. Why would you need to gag the weathermen if there wasn't something very big to hide? I had a NOAA scientist, Cap, say to my face, "We all know what's going on. We're alarmed as hell. We have no First Amendment protection. We don't know what to do," quote unquote.
Wait, time out. This gag order is taking place right now on these weathermen?
Right now, all agency operations, National Weather Service and NOAA, only federal, the government's weathermen. That does not apply to network meteorologists.
Got it.
But they're reading the same scripts, passes right down the line. They use the same terms. And sometimes you'll see when someone didn't get the updated script in time, they're still on the old script and their forecast is completely off base because, again, we're talking about the schedule weather and the schedule can change at any moment. But again, and this is published, to try to help people disseminate this issue, we pass on printed materials at geoengineeringwatch.org. We're non-political. We don't sell anything, but we pass on printed materials, colored, glossy satellite images, our booklets, and in that is a copy of the federal gag order against National Weather Service and no employees so people can see it with their own eyes. So the bottom line is, again, when we have a local meteorologist stating a week in advance that a particular day will be mostly sunny or filtered sunlight, and those terms are used here in Northern California on days when we have not a single natural cloud in the sky, only sprayed, dirty, filthy-looking canopy of aerosols, how would that meteorologist possibly know that spray dispersion was going to occur on that day, 7 days in advance? And we have aircraft traveling all kinds of trajectories across our skies where there are no commercial routes at all. We'll have virtual grid patterns one day and nothing the next, with no change in atmospheric conditions. People need to use their sense of reason. And this whole, quote, condensation trail narrative, Cap, is a massive deception perpetrated on populations. We have up-close film footage at geoengineeringwatch.org. We're only asking people to believe what they see with their own eyes, not anything that we say because we say it. We have up-close film footage of KC-10s, KC-135, C-17 Globemasters, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off, period. This is not condensation. And let's add this, all commercial carrier aircraft and all military tankers are equipped with what's known as a high bypass turbofan jet engine. That's a jet-powered fan designed for fuel efficiency. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. By design, that engine is nearly capable of producing any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances. And condensation doesn't behave as we've been told. If you see an Arctic researcher or someone in Antarctica and their breath is condensing, you see a cloud forming over their head after a minute or two. That's not what condensation does. If you see an air show in an aircraft making smoke, riding, or whatever they're doing, that's a particulate. That behaves in exactly the same way because we're talking about a sprayed particulate. And again, all of it showing up in our precipitation test. So this is an absolute inarguable scenario at this point. We need to expose it.
For me, as somebody who is not an expert in this area, here's where I come from personally. People would follow me and they would say, Cap, you definitely lean way more right on the spectrum politically. And not that every quote unquote conspiracy theory deserves the time of day, but I think what's interesting in regards to this conversation, particularly, I've seen enough from the media, Dane, where anytime there's a very quick and seemingly coordinated effort to shut down or to discredit a narrative, to me, it always makes me ask the question, well, what's really going on here? Because for me, if we really live in a free speech society, the truth should just win out. Let people say what they want to say. Why are we so quick to just demonizing and saying that this is misinformation or whatever? And for my audience's sake, here's why I'm personally curious about this. Number one, if this is true, that the government is actually manipulating the weather, and whether purposefully or this is just kind of a misfortunate or an unfortunate side effect of what they're doing, is they're causing, knowingly or unknowingly causing these natural disasters to occur. That's human life at stake. That's worthy of a conversation, in my opinion. And if we already know that the powers that be are genetically modifying food, they are tampering with elections through social media, they're tampering with the dispersion of media through legacy media. Now we're at the point where they're actually manipulating biological genders, and they're not ashamed of talking about that. Why would it be so far-fetched that they could create some sort of technology that would actually manipulate the weather? In fact, one of the things that I discovered, and by the way, guys, hold on tight, because I know what Dane's talking about is he's kind of giving some context into why he became passionate about this, but you're going to see how all this connects with what we're dealing with right now with these hurricanes. But one of the things I discovered in your documentary, in fact, it was the opening scene of the documentary, was all of these patents. There are actual patents showing how, people are making technology. And this wasn't like a very far-fetched thing a while ago. In fact, I want to share my screen, because there's a technology or a patent that I just found shared on x.com that I'd love your take on this. Quite honestly, I'm not a patent expert, but this just popped up. Patent US 200-300-85296A1 hurricane and tornado control device. So I'm not sure if this is one that you show in your documentary, but nevertheless, when you look at this patent, that is quite obviously a patent for a piece of technology to control tornadoes. So for me, it's like, okay, we have at least one example there. But is that something that you've seen as far as actual evidence that the government or other private entities are creating products that can manipulate and tamper with the weather?
Absolutely. That patent and about 200 more are it's titled The Extensive List of Patents at geoengineeringwatch.org. People can look at this themselves. They can research this themselves. And let's back up all the way to 1947, Cap, at the U.S. military's deployment of Project Cirrus, which was their initial hurricane intervention operations. And they were so effective then, even with the very small input of material into that storm. In fact, it was a few pounds of material only. They changed the course of that storm and caused extensive damage, and then later tried to do damage control to pretend that that's not what happened. Just like, Cap, did you see recently in Dubai, about a week after Dubai decided to ditch the US dollar, they were hit with 2 years worth of rain in 6 hours? Did you see that?
I didn't know the time frame, but I've seen videos of just absolute crazy rainstorms in Dubai, and I've also seen videos pop up from legacy media, not just from a social media source, but legacy media doing interviews about these things called cloud seeding in that part of the world. So I don't know if all of those are connected, but to me, it's like it hasn't been a secret until recently.
Okay, they're different animals, and they construct this for a reason, to try to hide climate engineering operations behind, quote, cloud seeding, which is a completely different animal. So for cloud seeding, which are known and acknowledged operations, we have about 300 across the US every year. That typically is a single engine propeller driven airplane that might disperse 5 or 10 kilos of material in a flight. Now we're talking about, with climate engineering, a single aircraft, a KC-135, can disperse 100 tons of nanoparticles in a single flight. So they want people to believe these two animals are the same. They are not. So with Dubai, they initially acknowledged that weather intervention operations were the reason that this epic, never before recorded deluge happened. And then they tried to walk that back. So this was not just some strong rainstorm. It was completely unprecedented. And it happened to be less than a week after Dubai announced they were going to ditch the dollar. So if we look at the control of precipitation on that scale, do we have historical precedents for this type of control? Yes. Project Popeye in Vietnam, U.S. military weather modification operations, a matter of historical record, were so successful at controlling the flow of precipitation that by 1976, international treaties were formed to forbid weather warfare. And not that anybody pays attention to that, but this is historical record. So again, for those that claim this can't be done or our government wouldn't do this, let's look at an acknowledgement from the Washington Post, 1977, in regard to the toxicological effects. As of 1977, the Washington Post acknowledged the U.S. military had conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians. How many have they done since? If we look at, you've seen, Cap, the Nevada nuclear bomb detonations. You've seen historical pictures of that, right? The bomb goes off and the soldiers jump out of the trench, run toward the blast center. Have you seen those historical military photos?
I haven't.
Well, they detonated bombs they were testing in Nevada, right? You know that.
Sure. Yeah.
They did about 500 tests there. How many people know that no less than 500,000 Americans are attributed to dying eventually from the downstream effect of those tests? All the soldiers that were put in the field for those tests and the filming of those tests all died early deaths because of the radiation exposure. So again, for those that think that the government is some benevolent caretaking force, think again. That doesn't mean we don't have well-intentioned people in the military, but it's up to them to break out of their compartmentalization and the programming that comes with the military and enforce the oath which they were given to protect their population from all threats, foreign and domestic. And those who are actually running the military, ultimately, Cap, it's those who print the money. Has nothing to do with elected officials, which I'm communicating with, by the way, at an hour conference call this morning with congressman from Tennessee. I'm communicating with the congressman from, and we passed legislation in Tennessee. Did you know that? Tennessee has just passed legislation signed by the governor forbidding climate engineering over their state. It's not.
When did that happen?
It happened 4 or 5 months ago. There's about 7 or 8 states in tow. And the congressman from the Carolinas, which I also had an hour conference call with last week, they absolutely know this is going on. They're livid. They're trying to band together behind the scenes so they don't get a boot put over their neck, because they'll try to hide these operations from the public and deny them until the last possible moment, because as soon as this is in the open, Every single climate cataclysm then becomes a potential liability to those in government. And to elaborate on that, at geoengineeringwatch.org under our documents section, we have documents like an 800-page U.S. congressional document that outlines the intergovernmental cooperation, even between otherwise adversarial nations like China, Russia, U.S. They are colluding and cooperating on these issues. And in that document, it calls for the specific blanket legal immunity for anyone and everyone involved.
I'm just pulling up your website right now so that people can go check this out for themselves. That's one thing I appreciate about you, Dane. Just so you guys know who are watching, I told Dane before we began this recording, I said, hey, I want to make sure that we are giving people every opportunity possible to look into this themselves, to be skeptical. You know, the desire here is not to just put on our tinfoil hats and get people worked up about nothing. We want to show the data. We want to show the truth. If you go to geoengineeringwatch.org, you can go, I think they can check out the actual documentary there, The Dimming. So go check that out. Go under documents. Here's the whole list of patents that he was talking about. This guy, Dane, and his team, they have worked extensively to pull all of this stuff together. And I'm telling you, like, the case is pretty hard to come against. I want to share, Dane, the video. I think that you guys just put this up regarding Hurricane Helene. I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I might try to configure my screen a little bit better here.
It's fully narrated on its own, too. Okay, what we're seeing there, that's Hurricane Helene as it's migrating inland. The blue flashes are frequency transmitter installations. It's called the NexRad network. Those transmissions have a repelling effect on the storm mass that's saturated with electrically conductive particles, so it can repel or corral that moisture wherever they want it. Where they de-energize, where you see the storm migrating to the northeast and there's nothing in front of it energizing, that creates a clear path for that moisture to migrate further north. Again, these are patented technologies, so they decided where that moisture would go and where it wouldn't. And we've also recorded this for other storms like Harvey, Ian, Michael, Maria. All these can be found if your followers search geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes, and where you feel we're not sure how long we're going to have access to the transmission frequency sites, but we have it still. We're going to keep recording this. We're recording Milton right now, but you're seeing real-time manipulation of a hurricane on that screen. That's exactly what you're looking at.
Help me understand. I'm not really tracking with what parts the manipulation. So here, I'm going to play it a little bit more slowly, or I'm going to play it back again. Point out to me what we're looking at.
Yeah. Okay. When you see that storm, as it migrated north, there was no transmission. The bright blue is an energizing of the transmission installation that corrals that storm and keeps that moisture in a certain place and disperses it. So when you first roll this video, right there, you see it migrating to the north. You don't see any blue.
So the blue is what's the blue part?
That's the sign of the transmission strength. So the brighter it gets, and as it changes color, it's getting even stronger. So you see that storm. You don't see anything on the right side or the eastern side of that storm. Right. You see it primarily in the western side. They're trying to keep it in that trajectory, and then they stop it and break it up so all the moisture falls right where it fell in the Carolinas. As that diminishes, they de-energize to the north side. Now you'll see that any remaining moisture migrates to the north with no energizing. The rest of the moisture just migrates toward the northeast in that picture. So again, a repelling effect. Think of it in that terms. And by that repelling effect, they can push that storm in the direction they want or corral it and break the moisture up so it all falls in a specific location. The more you understand that, the more you watch this type of video, that type of manipulation becomes clear. And again, these are patented processes of frequency transmission manipulation. And about our film, The Dimming, we made that film. We spent over six figures on that film. There's 2 U.S. Air Force generals in that film acknowledging these operations. There's former government scientists, former U.S. presidential cabinet member, former Canadian Minister of Defense. And with all we spent on that film and put into it, we made it available for free the day it was done. We're here for one purpose only, to stop this incredibly tyrannical interference in creation, in the life support systems which the Creator put on this planet. This is the most egregious form of interference the human race has yet launched.
So if I'm not mistaken, and this is a layman trying to get this on track for other laymen here. So the green, you can see the hurricane, you can see the eye of the storm, and it has a very natural sort of look to it, right? Very kind of organic formulation, and its movement. Its movement in general is very organic, but these blue things, are you saying that these blue frequency things happening over here, which are all kind of like populating at the same time? And I think the when you look at this, obviously this is like a time lapse condensed, but when you look at these frequencies, it's almost like they're all triggered at the same time. They're all coming alive at the same time. And are those happening from like some sort of machine or some sort of technology that's turning on and emitting these frequencies to literally push this hurricane in this direction?
Absolutely. That's a completely coordinated network. It's an AI controlled coordinated network.
Oh my goodness.
There's no question. You can find every one of these facilities. We know where every one of these facilities are, and they're identified. And again, we're told it's simply radar. It's not. It's part of the weather manipulation network. And listen to this, Cap. This is the official explanation for what you see there. When you see all that massive blue lighting up, here's the official quote debunking for that they just used for this exact video. We're told by the so-called debunking groups that what you're seeing is untold trillions of migrating birds all taking flight at the same time in perfectly circular formations around these I'm not kidding. And that's not the only explanation we've been given like that. We've been told from another source, another quote, official debunking source, that it was a literal 1,000 square mile cloud of ladybugs over from Barstow, California, all the way to San Bernardino, and nobody saw any. Okay, nobody saw any of these bugs. We were told the same thing about the same size cloud of dragonflies, which nobody saw. Let me add this too: the polymer fibers, which are a particular problem. You're
saying, hold on, Dane, real quick. You're saying all of this blue activity is birds and ladybugs.
I'm saying that's what official sources are trying to pass off as the truth. I mean, they must be laughing it up. They have to be laughing it up behind closed doors, Cap. I mean, it's at the point where they just feel that they can tell the public anything they want, and nobody questions anything. So let me add one more of this type of ludicrous explanation. So we had filaments. Part of this mix of climate engineering is polymer fibers. It's stated in the patents, and we know it's a part of the mix. It showed up on our test. So we had about a dozen cities across about a 500-mile stretch of California in which polymer fibers, all your listeners can look this up. Again, I encourage anybody to please investigate everything I say. So these filaments were stretched across street signs and parking lots. I mean, these were 30, 40-foot massive filaments, and it looked like a Halloween prop show of over 12 cities in 500 miles. And we were told this was trillions and trillions of ballooning spiders weaving their webs in the sky. And did they ever identify the species? No. Could they produce a single specimen? No. This is a mechanism malfunction. We've seen it before, and we've tested these filaments. And unless these ballooning spiders are making the webs out of aluminum and barium, it's not a spider web. So we have that kind of ludicrous deception here. And we know agencies are deceiving everyone too. In Northern California, Redding Environmental Waste, that's a town I live near. I was invited to a closed door meeting on the condition of confidentiality, which I've long since broken, but I was shown the test for the Sacramento River, the drinking water for the state of California, with massive spikes of aluminum after every single precipitation event. And they couldn't explain this. And they've never disclosed it. And that's the kind of, to preserve their paychecks and pensions, we have so many people, like the Milgram experiments, Cap, if you know what those are, that tests that prove most people will unfortunately do whatever they're told if they believe someone in authority is telling them to do it. And that needs to change. But we have that kind of cover up with, quote, official agencies. The whole system has been designed to mask these operations. I've had personal meetings with Gavin Newsom in the Capitol with his top aide, and he's an absolute tool of the power structure. He does whatever he's told. They've never disclosed that. I've spoken in front of the California Energy Commission that recognized they were losing 20 to 40% of the rain from particulates of unknown origin. Well, the California Air Resources Board knows where all the particles are coming from that are coming here. For them to not know where half of them are coming from is ludicrous. At that meeting with their top scientists there, they approved the purchase of a $250,000 spectrometer from Scripps Institute to determine the chemical composition and origin. That meter has never been seen or heard from since.
Oh my gosh. This is it's hard to take in. It's like, I think for a lot of people who are listening to this, they're probably thinking, some people have probably been on the rabbit trail for a while and they've lost trust in the government. So things like this just aren't going to surprise them much. But you got to imagine there's a lot of people who would listen to this, and it's like, you're telling me that the people that I've been trusting all of this time are actually, they're not worthy of my trust, and they're doing all of these things in these secret rooms or discussing these things in secret rooms. I mean, that's hard for people to stomach. Like,
I just want to, while you're on that point, I want to say the vast majority are simply doing what they're told. And that's their excuse. And I would argue that is no excuse. It's no excuse when you're told to do something that's wrong, you don't do it. But we have a society that is participating because they feel they need to for their livelihood and doing whatever they're told. That needs to change. Why did California municipalities stop testing for aluminum in the water in 2002? They stopped. Why? I've been in closed-door EPA meetings at the Capitol, 5 top EPA officials, arranged by a congressional rep, told in my face, the entire system is rigged. We're told to test for combustion particulates only. The rest of the samples go out the window.
I mean, I can't wrap my head around why that they would make that decision.
Well, they didn't make it. Someone above them made it. And
I want to share with you, if I can share with you some other photos and videos. These are other videos that are kind of circulating over the internet. This is a clip of just like we're seeing a handful of clips like this of very strange cloud patterns. I don't know if this happened just recently. I'm assuming this is happening in real time. We're seeing a lot of things like this. Now, here's the speculation. People are saying that this is a result. As you can kind of see, it looks like very wavy and almost looks like when you drop food dye into a cup of water. Some people are saying that that's, the result of human tampering with the weather. Some people are saying, no, that's naturally occurring. What's your perspective on that?
There's absolutely nothing natural about that type of cloud canopy. And so we recently, it's been several years, we had official agencies name about, I think it was 12 new cloud types that nobody ever noticed for 150 years. And they name new cloud types as if they've always been there, which they haven't. It's absolutely absurd. And the fact that so many go along with this, Cap, they go along to get along. And I would argue, I mean, there's nothing moral in that, nothing moral in doing whatever you're told if what you're told is wrong, or pretending something's normal when it's not. So again, the ramifications from what we're trying to address, it's so big that if we can blow this out into the open, people would, we hope, reevaluate everything they thought was so many things they were told were true that weren't. And this issue, again, you can't put this in the rearview mirror like you can with so many other lies from the criminal cabal that masquerades as a legitimate government, ours and others. They're all bad. But this one you can't put in the rearview mirror because it's getting bigger and harder to hide in front of the windshield every single day. They're becoming more desperate when they engineer things like Helene and now Milton. And again, the damage done is real. It's very real, as is the damage to the ozone layer, which by itself, Cap, if we had no other challenges, and we have many, but by itself, the damage to the ozone layer, which our metering indicates is down to about 30% remaining, not 30% declining, 30% remaining. And that's with the former NASA contract engineer that meters it for us. That by itself is an extremely near-term existential threat. No ozone layer, can't grow anything, no plankton, dead oceans, no more us. Simple. And we have recent peer-reviewed study of the Atlantic, Cap, of plankton populations from 500 locations, 90% decline. 90, that's a virtual crash. Plankton is the number one oxygen producer on the planet. Geoengineering Watch was the first major source to disclose that insect populations were collapsing around the globe in 2012. The so-called science community tried to marginalize us and deny it. Now I challenge your listeners to search insect apocalypse. They'll find mainstream science and media acknowledgement of what we said 12 years ahead of them. that insect populations are collapsing. We've lost 80 to 90% of Earth's insect populations now, today, terrestrial and aquatic. If the insects can't make it, how long will we be here?
I just literally did a Google search, and usually I wouldn't recommend necessarily going to Google for your credible source of information, but I'll just show you what Google says right here. It says some entomologists estimate that we are losing 10 to 20% of all the insects on Earth every decade.
So add that up over, they try to mask it with that kind of thing. So people think, oh, we've only lost 10 or 20%. That's every decade. And we see it downplaying.
So significant, even 10 to 20%. I mean, that's what? That's like over the course of a century, you have no more insects.
And we're there. So let's look at wildlife populations. You can pull this one up. We've lost 70% of Earth's wildlife populations in the last 40 years alone. I've seen some recent reports that tried to claim it's 60% over 50 years. 70% over 40 years is conservative. Wildlife populations are crashing around the globe. How many people know that?
Yeah, right here it says wildlife populations plummet by 69%. Yeah, that's
70.
I mean, that's again, you're sharing these things like they're saying that they're giving conservative estimates of what's happening, and even the conservative estimates are alarming.
Yes. So, Cap, bees are dying, right?
Bees, like
bees, honeybees.
Oh, bees. Yeah, for sure.
The bee decline, right? So, search bees aluminum. Pull that one up. Bees aluminum. We have peer-reviewed study to prove bees are dying of massive aluminum exposure, far away from any sort of industry or farming. It's so much aluminum exposure, they're dying of symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's and dementia in a human being. They can't even find their way back to the hive. Peer-reviewed study. Why haven't we heard anything about that? And if it's killing the bees, of course it's killing us. Every person we've tested, hair, blood, urine, packed with aluminum, barium, strontium, all the climate engineering elements. And we recognize there's many other sources of pollution. We're not denying that. I want to stress that. We've been very, very bad stewards of planet Earth, period. But how can we have any legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without addressing this elephant in the equation?
Do you think, I want to kind of get to some motive here, and then there's a lot I want to talk about too. Actually, this will be a great transition. So in the final edit of this video, audience, as you're watching this, I'm going to actually put the clip that I'm about to show Dane. I'm going to put it as a full clip so you can watch it with the sound, and then I'll narrate it for Dane right after. So check this out.
It's just an incredible, incredible, incredible hurricane. It has dropped 50 millibars in 10 hours. I apologize. This is just horrific. Maximum sustained winds are 160 miles per hour. I don't need to tell you, global warming, climate change, leading to this and becoming an increasing threat.
Here is a weatherman on MSNBC, and he's talking about Hurricane Milton, and he's literally choking up. Here, I'll pull it up on the thing here, just so maybe you can see this as a reference. He's literally choking up as he's talking about this, and I think it makes sense. He's choking up about talking about how severe this storm is, how fast it is, how small the eye of the storm is, indicating how tight that spiral is. But then he makes a comment that leaves everybody in the comments basically, they're like, I totally checked out after he said this. He said, quote, he said, this is due, like, it's just showing us how bad climate change and global warming has gotten. Now, I want to hear your perspective, number one, on what he's saying about the devastation of Hurricane Milton in general, and then his emotional tie to this being connected to climate change.
First, again, for any quote expert to not first and foremost include climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare, is disingenuous in regard to the whole subject of the damage done to the planet. It's imperative that people understand it's a this and that equation, not a this or that, but a this and that. So although I'm no fan of Al Gore or any of the environmental groups, all of them behaving with criminal hypocrisy. And we know this because Geoengineering Watch attorneys spoke to all the attorneys from all the major environmental groups, Sierra Club, Greenpeace, WWF. None of them will address climate engineering because they don't want to lose their 501c3 nonprofit. And simply, that's not okay. That's criminal. So back to the state of the planet, any form of human activity that affects the energy balance of the planet and the planet's life support systems are a part of the problem. There's no question about that. But that being said, this intentional intervention has prevented the planet from responding on its own to the damage done, as the creator would have made that happen. And not to say that puts us in the clear at all, because again, we're being abysmal stewards of planet Earth. I used to dive at the Channel Islands off the coast of California for years until we found out that they dumped 500,000 barrels of DDT out there with the government looking the other way. And that's one of 18 dump sites. That's just one example of what's being done to an Earth that we're supposed to be stewards of. So what we believe is important at geoengineeringwatch.org, let's build bridges and not burn them. We all agree that what's happening over our heads in this intentional intervention being used as a weapon of war, because we see agricultural regions, for example, our food supply being targeted with these operations, flash drought, flash flood, baseball and softball size hail. Cap, you've seen that a lot lately, right? The massive hail.
Yeah.
Falling everywhere. That's chemical ice nucleation operations. That's another aspect of climate engineering. So we all agree that none of this is okay or in our best interest. So we would argue, let's focus on this, and then we can sort the rest out later. But it's imperative that we don't at the same time deny that we've been bad stewards of the planet, because we certainly have. So we have one side taking that position, denying there's any problem, and the other side denying there's climate engineering. And somewhere we have to meet in the middle and build a bridge and stop this. And the government has very successfully driven those wedges, Cap, very successfully. For example, here's one. How many times have you heard it's the cow flatulence that's the problem? You've heard that, right?
Yeah.
What does that do to people? It certainly completely makes them want to run for cover from any discussion on this issue. But cutting down a forest to raise a cow is not okay. That causes a problem. But the cow flatulence is simply a wedge to drive into certain demographics to make them reject all of this, when in fact, on the methane issue, we do have a real problem, and that's methane hydrate thawing, releasing, exploding. If you searched Siberian methane craters, or your listeners do, look at those pictures. That will shock you to the marrow. It's methane literally exploding out of the tundra. The Bermuda Triangle scenario, that's methane. For decades, methane deposits on the seafloor has been thawing, releasing. It aerates the water like a bottle of champagne. If there's a surface vessel overhead, it goes to the bottom intact. Then that methane enters the atmosphere, starts to cover the planet like a layer of glass, which traps immense amounts of heat. It's 120 times more potent than CO2 over a 10-year time horizon. Now it's exploding from the Arctic tundra. And again, these pictures should be seen. It looks like nuclear bomb detonations. Craters a couple hundred feet wide, a couple hundred feet deep. You can't imagine what did that. Climate engineering making all of it worse in the effort to mask it. And back to the motive of this, many, many motives behind climate engineering, not just one. If we take climate engineering, the effort to mask everything I just described is making it worse overall. No surprise, like the pharmaceutical cure for the human body, and you listen to the side effects, you wonder who would take that. But it's the same mentality and people making money on this. So in this industry, so we have these larger motives of masking the severity of damage done to the planet while inflicting even more damage at the same time. And we have other motives that are certainly mixed up in this mix. If we look at Helene, and for example, the lithium deposit there, which I'm sure you've heard about, Piedmont Lithium, hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars, landowners, a roadblock. Piedmont has contracts with DOD that aren't being fulfilled. DOD has its own interests that certainly don't involve the good of the American public or anybody else. So are there other motives mixed up in this? Yes. Again, it's a this and that equation. Do we have disaster capitalists? Yes, always. Just as we do in wars. We have disaster capitalists that make money off both sides of the fight, right? They do. Does that mean the fight didn't happen or people didn't die? No, it doesn't mean that. Same is true here. So just because people are making money off the imploding climate system and climate engineering, a big part of that, it doesn't mean that the damage isn't real, because it is. But for this meteorologist to put on that kind of an act without acknowledging climate engineering, which is perhaps what he should be crying about the most, that's criminal.
You're talking about the motive a little bit. It's almost as if if you follow the money, you'll start to uncover like why people are actually possibly doing these sorts of things. I'm curious. You talked about the lithium situation in the southeast of, North Carolina, West North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee. What about Florida? I mean, do you suspect what we just saw, by the way, the chart with the frequency and the hurricane movement? That was the movement of Hurricane Helene. We're currently about to see what Hurricane Milton does, but I'll share this. This is basically a prediction of how Hurricane Milton is going to move through the state of Florida. From your estimation, is it too early to see, or are you pretty confident that this is also due to climate engineering?
The spawning of the storms is something we do not try to conclude on, because the oceans are superheating. I mean, they're absolutely superheating, and they're certainly capable of spawning these storms. That being said, the climate engineers are also capable, with atmospheric pressure zone manipulation, of creating conditions that are conducive to spawning the storms as well. So but that's something we can't prove definitively. What we can prove definitively is that the storms are being steered. Frequency transmissions are inarguable. Their effect on the storm is inarguable. Their capabilities and patented technologies are inarguable. So we focus on what we can definitively prove. In regard to atmospheric pressure zone manipulations, and that's another aspect of these frequency transmitters. For your listeners that know what HAARP is, that's the ionosphere heater in Alaska. Its acronym is HAARP. And that is quite simply a weapon of mass destruction. It's an ionosphere heater. It's a frequency transmitter. It's very different than the NexRad transmitters that you see on the initial film. HAARP transmits 3.6 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere, causes an electrical chain reaction, superheats that layer of the atmosphere, which causes the atmosphere to bulge and expand up and down. The downward push of that air creates a high pressure heat dome. Have you heard that term a lot lately, Cap? High pressure heat dome. Cap, where are you located at again?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay, so you're not here in the West. We hear that term all the time because we're parked under an ionosphere. It's a high pressure heat dome, and the meteorologists use the high pressure heat dome term all the time. It doesn't move. So under this heat dome, this compressing air, why would they do that? Again, many agendas being carried out. One, it's greatly decimating the agricultural production in California. You can't grow anything here at this point. Photosynthesis, by the way, for those that don't know, it stops at 104 degrees. It tapers down to that point, stops at 104. Now we have intense UV that causes plants to shut down their stomata, the respiratory ports. Same with forests and foliage. So the forests don't smell like forests here. The trees aren't breathing. They're not absorbing carbon. They're not releasing oxygen. They're dying a slow, protracted death. The aluminum is poisoning the root systems. It's killing soil microbiome. But why would they want to affect food systems? Again, when populations don't have enough to eat, they're not going to focus on anything else. And I want to stress, those who control our government, for those who still think that some elected official somewhere is the one pulling the strings, please research reality in this case. That is not who is pulling the strings. Those who print the money pull the strings. They control militaries, thus they control countries. The Pentagon, and your listeners can search this, is missing something on the order of $30 trillion in the last 20 years. Where did that money come from, let alone where did it go? These are black ops operations for those who really control the levers of power. So back to the high pressure heat dome, that rotates the jet stream clockwise in the northern hemisphere around that high pressure heat dome. So under the dome, we don't even get clouds, Cap. It's nothing but hot, day in, day out. Nighttime doesn't cool off. It's like living in hell here. But the moisture that goes up and around us comes down in the eastern half of the U.S., which, by the way, since 2012 is the most anomalously less warm region in the entire world. Why would they want to cool the eastern half of the U.S.? That keeps the confusion and division going on the true state of the climate and damage to the climate. That's where most Americans live, in the eastern half. And they can't figure out what all this hubbub is about the state of the planet when they're wet and cool most of the time, or we're baking. So psychologically, when it's cool outside your front door for most people, they can't really relate to living in hell outside our front door here and watching the entire forest die around us. So there's a psychological aspect, again, to confuse and divide the population on the state of the climate. And they do the same thing in many other arenas, as you know, the outrageous social issues that we now have dumped on us that have everybody infighting about that, justifiably so, but that distracts people from the oncoming train of total global ecological collapse with climate engineering fueling the fire. So again, there are so many layers to this, and people need to keep that in mind. It's a very complex component that is so core to our common existence that we simply have to deal with this, Cap. This is the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat.
So I understand that, like, all of the things that connect together, all of the players and all of the different technologies and et cetera. But for me, I think the truth has to be pretty simple here. And I'm trying to understand personally, what is the true motive? Because to me, it's like some of these things just don't really make a lot of sense. Even the connections that you're making about, like, the aluminum and, like, just how it's just outright poisoning people. It's poisoning wildlife, destroying wildlife. What's the motive behind all of this? Is all of this just kind of like a negative side effect of carelessness, of trying to, like, just experiment with different things? Or is it something, because if I can just be completely honest, this sounds like something that is apocalyptic in regards to some, like, wanting control, like whoever the powers that be that are doing this, it is an effort to destroy a population and to take control. And it's hard for me to see any other way around it, but what's your take? Without being sensationalistic, what's your take on why this is happening?
You answered your own question. You're completely correct. Ultimately, this is all about power and control. And those in power and control are not going to relinquish that power and control till the brutal, bitter end. So this current paradigm of loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute until nothing is left was never sustainable. And again, I'm no fan of Al Gore or any of the environmental groups, but quite simply, we should have taken much better care of this miracle planet, the creation that we were given. Those in power have the most to answer for because they've done the most to create this paradigm of total destruction. But they are not going to relinquish this power until nothing is left. And if we look at psychoanalysis, and this is right from the manual, the psychoanalysis of those who crave power, and it is an addiction. Does an addict care that the next fix will kill them? They don't care. They're not going to stop. And power, the ultimate addictive scenario. So if we look at psychoanalysis of those in power, the conclusion is from this analysis that there's a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. Let's look at some examples of that. The 2,400 nuclear bombs that have been detonated, just to see how they work. Don't we know after a few dozen? But they kept going. 2,400 contaminated the entire planet, including everyone in the power structure, but they did it anyway. Project Starfish Prime, the detonation of nuclear bombs in the magnetosphere. And if your listeners have never seen, there's a movie called The Nuclear, it's narrated by William Shatner. It's called The Nuclear Bomb Movie. I can't think of the start of the title. It's historical footage. And Trinity, The Nuclear Bomb Movie, narrated by William Shatner. And if you watch that, you'll know that there's something seriously wrong with our species, that no one would do what they do, bombing pristine South Sea islands and setting up animals to see what happens with them, or telling our soldiers to jump out of the trench and run toward the bomb site. So 2,400 nuclear bombs detonated. Project Starfish Prime, the magnetosphere detonations, which they thought could collapse the atmosphere. Did that stop them? No, it didn't stop them. Fukushima, triple nuclear meltdown, no end in sight, no technology to fix it. The sarcophagus around Chernobyl is disintegrating. That's going to rear its head again soon. We have 440 more new plants that will go into meltdown when society collapses and there's no one there to cold shut them down, which takes about 2 to 3 decades, by the way. And we're building more new plants right now. So there's no sanity in this equation, because many people, as a reason not to face this issue, we've been trained not to face issues like this, Cap. And doing what you do, You know that. I mean, I know you know that we've been trained as a society that to turn away from any unpleasant truth, and that's
Sure.
not godly or spiritual or scriptural. So we need to rethink that. And the bottom line is we have enough examples to know that we're dealing with a headless, heartless, soulless cancer of control, and so many playing their individual part in that just to get their paycheck and pension. And we're in the fast track to a lifeless planet if we continue on this course.
So as we close, Dane, I'm a big proponent of, I'm big on not playing the victim. I'm big on, let's take some personal responsibility. Let's not, hope is not lost. I know that you're a man of faith, as am I, and we know that when you're on God's side, there's always hope, but there's also a personal responsibility and accountability that I think people can have. And to say that it's all in their hands, all the kings and rulers and and they're the ones making these decisions, true. But what's your encouragement to the everyday person who's listening to this and they feel hopeless, they feel powerless, they feel like they can't make a difference? How would you encourage that individual?
I hope that your followers may take the time to watch the dimming, but the last 5 minutes of the dimming, and that the editor that was a godsend, where if you knew the story of how difficult of time we had, the third editor was found dead 5 hours after I talked to him. Maybe just a big coincidence, but he was from the entertainment industry, and they give their more or less their oath of NDA, non-disclosure agreement on certain things. And I mean, there's certain conditions that go with being successful in that industry. And he was in that industry. He was very behind this. Died 5 hours after I talked to him, and our massive hard drive delivered FedEx 5 hours later in the morning. That never showed up. Couldn't find that. And all just freak coincidences. But the fourth editor that came out of nowhere that for me was an absolute godsend. And he, at the end of the dimming, to answer your question, he took excerpts from my weekly broadcasts over many years and formed what I wanted to say to the world. And here it is in a nutshell, that any one of us could be the final pebble that triggers the landslide of awakening. That's the message in the epilogue of the dimming. And we have no idea if we simply stand our ground, stay at our post, and fulfill our appointed tasks, who can say what's possible? And we are definitely not alone in this fight. And no matter how long the odds are against us, we still stand a chance. And again, this is the David and Goliath tale. Did David tuck tail and run for cover? No. Should we? Of course not. Don't hide in your cabin on the sinking Titanic. Get on deck. Do your part. If we all do that, we could accomplish profound good. And if we can free this miraculous planet, and it is miraculous, Cap, I walk through the forest here and I live in the middle of it, and I'll send you an image of where, I mean, you can't see only wilderness in every direction, which is thriving. And I so relished the time I was allowed to toil there, restoring habitat, but I couldn't stay there in good conscience. I couldn't look my maker in the eye and know what I knew and stay there and hide from this issue. But when I consider how miraculous it all was and the creator behind it, who can say what's possible if we stand our ground and do our part? And I, for one, intend to do that until my last breath, to the brutal bitter end. I will not relinquish this post.
Well, Dane, I want to thank you for your time. And I also want to thank you for your commitment to doing this work. It's obviously extremely important. And the way that you're doing it with such intellect and rigor and trustworthiness. And I just want to thank you for all the work that you've done. And I would encourage everybody here. I want you to go check out his website, geoengineeringwatch.org. Look into it yourself. Where can they follow you on social media for more information as these things occur?
Geoengineeringwatch.org is of course our hub. We're non-political. We don't sell anything. And we have the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. I don't manage the platform, so we have a couple different labels on that because someone stole our name just to keep us from using it, I guess. But you can find everything you need. All our links to our other platforms are all on geoengineeringwatch.org. And if someone has a specific question or a photo to share of their skies, or they can reach us at admin@geoengineeringwatch.org, and we will continue to move this fight forward, Cap, as fast as we can. And my deepest gratitude to you. It's not common to find someone so analytical and articulate. And that's, the kind of people I'm sure must follow you are exactly the kind that we need in this battle. And if we can expose and stop this, it would be a quantum leap in the right direction. It would cause a shockwave around the world.
I agree. Well, hey, Dane, thank you so much, man. And I have a separate word for my audience that I'll share as we close it out. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Hey, guys, I know this is a lot to digest. And for some of you, you might be freaking out. It might be increasing your anxiety. But here's what I want to tell you. The Bible says in Matthew 24, this is the scripture where Jesus is reminding his followers of what is going to occur before he comes back to judge the earth, but to rescue his church, to rescue his chosen people. That's good news. That's what he wants to do. And why does he tell us these signs? He tells us to look at these signs in Matthew 24 so that we're not scared, but we're prepared. One of the things that he talks about, though, is an increase of earthquakes. He talks about increase of pestilences and famines and lawlessness and immorality and all these sorts of things. Let me tell you, these things are increasing right before our eyes. And can I tell you something else too? Could it be that a lot of these things, most of these things are increasing, not because it's God who's doing them, but it's because of us. It's because of our rebellion against God and not following his ways. Well, let me tell you, there is still mercy for us today. My encouragement to you, though, is to not get bent out of shape, to not get angry at flesh and blood. Don't get angry at people. People are not the enemy here. There is a spiritual battle that's being waged. And yes, share this video and let people know about what's happening. We want people to practically know. But ultimately, knowledge without revelation of who Jesus is and his plan for us is going to lead people to despair. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to share this video, especially this prayer that we're going to do, because we want people to be educated, but we want people to also have hope. And then here's what I want you to also do. I want you to pray. I want you to pray like a Holy Spirit-filled, blood-bought believer, a son of the King, somebody that God actually leans his ear toward because he loves you and because you have authority. Jesus said, if you pray, if you tell that mountain to be cast into the sea, it will be done. Jesus modeled for us a type of prayer life where he stilled storms. Hello, Elijah, a man of God, he decided by the power of God, by the anointing of God, he decided when the drought would come and when the rains would come. You and I, we need to understand we have authority. We have the authority to pray against these things. Here's what I want to do right now. I want to lead us in a very simple but powerful prayer. Father, we thank you for your divine power. We ask right now in the name of Jesus for you to preserve human life in Florida and other parts of the country that are being affected by these storms. We thank you, God, for a dispatching of your angels. Father, send your angels now to people that whether they know you or not, we pray, God, for your mercy. We speak to that storm and we command it to decrease and dissolve in Jesus' name, that its power would be deflated. We thank you, Lord, for your protection over the state of Florida and beyond. And I pray, God, that you would use this moment to raise believers up and that you would listen, you would show your people that if they would humble themselves and believe you and seek you, that you would be quick to listen and answer prayers. Father, I pray that what the devil meant for evil, you would get all the glory that you deserve out of this circumstance. Protect the innocent, protect fathers, mothers, and men, women, and children alike. Protect them all. Father, spread your wings of protection over these people. May they be covered by the shadow of your wing and be preserved and see the day of the living and see your mercy shine forth in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, if you don't have a relationship with God, you want to learn how to. I mean, you're looking at these things happening in the world, and you're thinking, Cap, this is pretty crazy. What do I do? How do I get right with God? I have another video at the end of this one that will teach you whether or not you're going to go to heaven or hell when you die. Most important video you ever watch. Go watch that. Go check out my live Bible studies, other interviews. And thanks so much for tuning in. I will see you all in the next video. God bless you all. Take care.